Hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on testing databases and web services. Next step in your test automation cycle. Uh, Before we start with today's webinar, just would like to introduce myself. I'm Ritesh Kavya. I'm senior BPO here, working at Signet Infotech. Today's webinar will be presented by my colleague Dakshis Shah, the QA and Software Testing Manager of Signet. So today's webinar will be sponsored by Signet Infotech Private Limited. So before we switch to the today's webinar, I just would like to introduce about our company. So we are Signet Infotech Private Limited. We are based into India. We have our offices at US, Australia, as well as South Africa also. We are IT services and product development company. We are CMMI level 3 and ISO 9001 certified also. We are ISO 27001 also, and we are also ISTQB certified Silo partner also. So today's webinar will be presented by my colleague Dakshis, which I have already told you. So before I give my mic to my colleague, just wanted to give you an introduction what exactly we are going to cover up in our today's session. So what will be the agenda for our today's webinar? So we'll just give you the brief introduction, what is backend testing, the common challenges that are facing in current situation, in current scenario in test automation cycle, and yeah, of course, what can be automated using TestingWhiz. So like how database automation testing can be done, data comparison can be done, of course, web service testing, and the batch process validation. And yes, in the last session, we will also introduce the TestingWhiz and will give you a detailed demonstration of the tool. So that's it from my side. So I just hand over the mic to my colleague Dakshis, so he will take you to the next session. Thank you. Over to you, Dakshis.
Hi everyone, this is Dakshis Shah, QA manager at Signet Infotech, responsible for Signet Infotech's product services as well as TestingWhiz, which is one of the products that Signet Infotech is working upon. So as Ritesh has mentioned, today's agenda is where we want to talk more about how can we take our test automation cycle to the next level by introducing backend test automation concepts, and how can we help for doing the backend automation, because if we talk about different tools that are available in the market today, there are not a lot of tools that would help us do the complete backend automation testing that is being carried out. But even before moving into some backend testing, I want to highlight more about actual backend. What do you mean by backend? If you talk to a lot of people in the market, then most of the people would say that doing database testing would be considered as backend testing. That would be true. At the same time,
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So at the same time, to take it one step further, there are a lot of other aspects of doing backend testing, whereas for any application where there is no user interface and we are doing the complete system testing without having access to the user interface, which the end users would have, that would be considered as a backend testing, which would more or less include database testing, obviously, web services testing, then batch process validations, because there are a lot of applications across different domains where we have to go through different sets of infrastructure, get the files from particular location, put it in different folders, then do the process uh, job execution. Once the job execution is taken care of, then you probably verify the business rules based on which the files were executed. So these are some of the other forms of backend testing, actual backend. Now, how do we do backend testing? More or less, if you talk to anyone that is doing complete backend testing right now, what they would say is that what they do is do some manual checks and take their process forward that way, and they ensure, in a nutshell, that they are able to do basic level of database testing, then do some basic level of web services testing with certain tools that are available in the market like SOAP UI, and do complete manual testing of batch process validations. But today we want to introduce the concept of doing backend automation. How would that be possible? Obviously, we'll talk about it going forward. But before moving into how we can do that, what is the need of backend testing? So, as I had already mentioned, backend testing includes database testing, web services portion, and job processing across different applications or the same application. Now, if you continuously keep on checking backend, it would help to reduce the issues that are being faced by the actual end users. And if you talk about the whole application architecture, when you're starting to work on a new project, more or less what would happen is that the application architecture is ready, but at the same time, the UI still may be in the phase of being developed. So what do we do? As a testers, what do we do during that time? If we have knowledge of backend testing, if we have the tools available for doing backend automation, then we can definitely invest our efforts into creating the test suites for backend testing, and right away find out the issues earlier in the development cycle, so that we can fix it earlier compared to after going through the whole functional verification from the UI perspective. So that's definitely one of the benefits that you get out of backend testing. And as I mentioned, if you improve your processes in the sense that if you introduce backend testing earlier in the development cycle, the cost would be reduced, obviously, so that would improve the ROI. So there are some of the benefits and some of the things where we can say that introducing backend testing would definitely help any organization improve the testing process as well as improve the ROI on the investment they have made. Moving on, what is backend testing? This is the general backend testing concept that we are already talking about. When we say database testing, what exactly do we mean by database testing? So what we can do is database health checks, where we can say that, okay, is that the number of data sets that we are expecting from the application, is that coming out to be proper? So that's kind of health check that we can carry out. Data validation in the sense that if we are expecting number of tables, number of columns to be available as part of our database, we can verify all those things as part of our data validation. And at the same time, if we are interacting with the application from the UI, then what is the impact if a user is entering certain information from the UI? How is being database impacted from that information? So that is something that we can verify as part of our data validation. Backend system testing. As I mentioned earlier, there may be a lot of applications. If you talk about healthcare domain, financial domain, even defense domain, there are a lot of applications that work in the background, doing a lot of job processing and stuff like that, where the actual end user may not even have an idea of exactly what is happening in the backend. But for us to work as a system, and if our application is being integrated into different systems, obviously we have to check the interaction between all these different applications. So that's where this backend system testing concept would come into picture, where you're doing all these validations, verifications, and everything in the backend itself using different files, like it may be in XML format, JSON format. So for us, understanding all this would definitely add value. So that is something considered as part of our backend testing. Web services, obviously one of the most important aspects in the service-oriented architecture stuff, where you make a web service which could be utilized across a whole spectrum of applications, or even when we are talking about creating mobility applications. The web services obviously comes into picture, and if the web services are not working, obviously our mobile applications are not going to work properly. So it's better for us to keep on verifying these web services at a regular interval of time. That way we'll be able to ensure customer delight at the end of our testing cycles. Obviously this is something that is very important. And obviously RESTful and SOAP web services both are part of our backend testing concepts. Moving on, we want to talk about the common challenges that backend testing people generally face. So if you talk about it's very challenging, because as I mentioned, if you are talking about kind of creating our inputs in XML format or JSON format, first of all we need to understand what do we mean by that format, and that format may vary based on the application. So one format may not be applicable to the other applications. For us, as a new tester or a tester who is gaining experience into this market, understanding all these concepts makes a lot of it's very challenging. And then there is no UI, so you don't know exactly how it's supposed to be working. So we have to have a very good business understanding of the application. So that would be okay. Moving on, checks for best practices and standards enforcement. As I mentioned, if you're using XML format or JSON format, it has to be consistent across all your applications, because if it's not, then probably one of your applications may be working fine, but you can say that when that information is being sent over to a different module or a different application, that application will not be able to accept that input because they are not following the standards. So those standards have to be defined and understood by all the people involved in the development cycle across different projects, different modules. Whosoever is involved, they should be in line with our standards. And as a tester, we also need to understand those standards and practices that we are following. Yeah, one of the important aspects, database schema changes. For people who are working in agile methodology, would concur on that if at least the basic requirements for the end product, if it's not defined upfront, a lot of times what may happen is that as and when new change comes into picture, people would start realizing, oh, this would require a database change, and that would definitely impact our testing cycle, because changing the databases frequently would definitely impact the whole application, where if you are making changes into certain data types, certain data columns, or adding a number of rows, it's going to make an impact somewhere or the other in the application. So that has to be communicated to the testing team upfront, and the testers have to be aware of what kind of database schema changes are happening in the application. Now, this may not be required for all the people who are involved in testing, but this is something that is definitely useful for any tester if they want to expand their horizon and start getting involved into some technical aspects. So definitely this is one of the challenges that we have realized that. Data integrity tests are always tricky. When we say data integrity tests, what do we mean by that? We mean by that, as I mentioned, number of tables, number of columns, the data types that are being used in that. We have to constantly ensure that we are following the same standards, even though there may be certain changes in the schema. That should not impact the whole database itself. So that is something as testers we need to keep in mind, and that is something that is very challenging for us. Repetitive testing cycles, yes. If the application is in formative stage, there may be a lot of repetitive testing cycles, which is kind of cumbersome. So that's definitely a challenge for a backend tester, whereas doing automation for this kind of activities definitely would add value to their activities, because Even though there are repetitive testing cycles, their time for testing would be reduced with automation. Constant monitoring and scalability. Yes, definitely, because the reason for that is if we are, kind of constantly upgrading our architecture or the backend applications, then we require constant monitoring. Let's take a case of web services. If we don't do constant monitoring and we make it in such a way that it's scalable enough for a number of different users for that particular web service, what may happen is that after a certain usage for that web service, it will be it will crash kind of. So that's not a good sign. So we have to constantly monitor it and make it ready for scalable aspects, make it more scalable. So these are some of the things that as testers we have to we face this kind of challenges and we have to keep these things in mind. Now, what can be automated? Let's say for database, what can be automated? That would definitely be one of the questions that people would ask, and how it can be done. Obviously, for how it can be done, we are going to show you a demo. But what can be is the first question that would be. We keep on talking about data integrity checks. So obviously, as I had mentioned, ensuring that the data that we're receiving and the tables that we're storing it follows certain standards that come under data integrity checks. Performance checks where if you have huge amount of data, you have to ensure that you keep on testing with the huge amount of data over and over a period of time, so that if the system is crashing, you'll still be able to figure out the issues upfront. So that is performance checks for from the database perspective. Database schema checks we've already talked about, where if something is changing, as testers, we have to be able to account for that. We have to be able to test for it. If certain data types are changing, number of new tables are being introduced due to changing functionality, we should be aware of it and should be able to include it as part of it can be included as part of our automation script itself. Database security checks, very important aspect. The reason for this being that role-based access. Most of the applications have role-based access as part of the database. So not everybody should be able to access all the different parts of my database, and that can be carried out as part of my automation cycle, whereas I can keep on continuously verifying that for a particular username with certain level of access, that person should not be able to access certain data sets or certain tables. So that comes under database security checks. Moving on, data comparison testing. Yes, data alteration checks, where you keep on verifying your data with the different sets of data and ensuring that there is no impact on the UI or no impact on the functionality that is being performed. So that's something that can be taken care of. Production staging and validation. Very good use case where a lot of people come across this kind of situation where staging and production have to be in kind of sync, but a lot of times those data sets are out of sync due to different reasons, because testers may be verifying with the different sets of data on staging environment, which is probably not possible in the production environment. So how do we do the verification? So in this case, what we can do is we can clean up the database on staging environment and ensuring that it exactly matches with the production, and then we can run the scripts and ensure that it's exactly like the staging environment is exactly like production, and vice versa. Process update based on validations. So once we carry out all these validations, we can update our database testing processes to ensure that it's working according to our expectations. Scheduling batch jobs of DML queries. Let's say there is another use case for doing it. Okay, if I want, as a tester, if you want to create different sets of data, what we can do is we can create a bunch of DML queries or DDL queries based on our requirements, and schedule a job for it, so that every time we want to go through a new testing cycle, the data set is ready for me, instead of us creating manual sets of data. This would definitely help us prepare our sets of data and ensure that the same DMO queries or DDL queries are executed on a frequent time frames. Web services testing. Status and health checks. If we keep on doing health checks, verify that web services are working fine. Obviously, other features or other functionality which depend on the web services will be working fine. So we are taking our testing cycle one step ahead. Instead of holding it back till the end user, we are taking it one step ahead. We are doing the testing earlier in the release cycle. That we will be able to verify things are working fine or not. Reusable component checks. As web services are all the reusable components, we keep on checking it and ensuring that if there are different components that utilize this web services, all those components would also be working fine in terms of accessing this web service. Regression tests. We can continuously carry out the regression tests for all these web services and report the issues right away when we get any issues. Validating the business flows. Obviously, web services would have its own business rules, like for certain web services, if you provide different parameters, then it would result, the results would be different. And based on the results that you're receiving on the web services, application may behave in a different way. So if you understand the business flow, you'll be able to test all the web services in a quicker manner as well as in a better manner. That's something, these are all the different aspects that we can automate for web services. Batch process validation. What is batch process validation? As I mentioned to you earlier, our application may be receiving data from different sources, maybe in an Excel format, directly from the database, and maybe flat text files. And then once we do our batch process, once we execute our batch process, depending on the source of information, depending on the data being contained in all these different sources, certain actions would be taken based on our business rules. And after that, the result may be stored in a different sources, or the system may send those information forward to other applications. So at that moment of time, what we can do is, after we execute the batch process, we can do file validation, different kind of, if there are any error validations, we can carry out that, and then data validation. The information that we are sending over to other applications, that can also be automated. So these are the aspects of batch process validation that can be automated using the automation aspect, automation strategy that we are suggesting. So this is what we are trying to cover as part of our webinar today. In a nutshell, this is what we are suggesting. Now, we would like to showcase the same thing using TestingWhiz, which is a proprietary Signet Infotech test automation tool, which does all these things very nicely in a user-friendly manner. And we would want to highlight you exactly how this can be carried out. So for that, I would hand it over to my colleague, Mr. Balbodh Jha, who is a technical expert on TestingWhiz, and he will give you an overview of TestingWhiz, and then we have created certain demo scripts for all this checks, that data comparison checks, data validation, database schema check, web services validation. So we'll give you a demo of each and every aspect, and we'll also explain you what do we mean by each test. And then after that, we'll go through question and answer session. If you have any questions regarding today's webinar and our automation approach for backend testing, we can talk about it after this demo. I'm handing it over to Mr. Balbodh Jha.
Thank you, Dakshesh. Hello everyone, I am Balbodh Jha, and I am working in Signet Infotech as a TestingWhiz expert, and we'll just hop over to our live demo. So I'll just go to one of the servers which are made available with us. Okay, so here we are. This is our TestingWhiz tool. In this, we can do web UI validation, database testing, web services, RESTful web services testing, and image comparison based testing. So all these things can be automated with this simple, easy to use tool. Currently, to showcase what Dakshesh has said, we have prepared some of the use cases of testing data tables and web services. Now, talking about databases, I have made a use case wherein this test case would fetch the query from database 1, and the second query would be fetching from the database QA database, and in our next steps it would compare those results and decide whether the test case is being passed or failed. In the next test case, this test case would return the table count from the QA and production database and check for whether those count are matching or not. If it is matching, then it would pass the test case, otherwise fail. This test case would count the number of procedures which are available in our database. Same, it would count the production database procedures and QA database procedures, and it will return me the failed or passed test case based on the number of count gathered from those databases. Same, functions count, and this test case would determine the invalid character sets which are available in this database, my production database, and give me the result according to that. Now this test suite has scenarios of a security check. This will check the total number of users which are having super admin permissions, and this test case would validate the password hash check, whether the password is encoded in a particular format or not. So this would check those test cases. In the end, we are checking whether we are making use of a web service which would fetch me the weather of today, and it will capture the longitude and latitude of the particular city which we are fetching, and then it will print the weather, and in our next test case it will validate those longitude and latitude available from Google. So this test case would validate whether the web services are performing correctly or not, and giving us the appropriate values of longitude and latitude. So this is my database and web services. Let's execute and see. As you can see, this is the backend process which is going on, and this is the UI which is fetching the longitude and latitude of the Moscow, and it will validate with our web services. If you see the result, then the first test case in the first test suite has failed. Why? Let's check that. The first test case has failed because TestingWhiz found that the count in DB1, user record of count in DB1 and DB2 is different. So that's why it has failed. The databases didn't have the same number of rows and columns. That's why it failed. And if you go to pass menu, this says that these were the total number of count, and so these many of number of procedures, both were equal. Here also function count were equal. Security checks, this is different, and hash check. If we go to web services, then this was web service fetched the longitude as 55.75 and latitude as 37.61, and whether it found was clear. Now this with the second test case in the web services test suite would validate those found longitude and latitude and return us the result that both were equal. So this is the part of demo with TestingWhiz.
So thank you, Balbu. I think we are able to get basic information out of this demo is that it is with this particular tool, it is definitely easy to integrate all of this backend testing related concepts into my test automation suite so that I can take my test automation to the next level. Whereas instead of only doing UI based testing, I can do all these checks and ensure that my application is working perfectly before releasing to my end users or even to other customers. So definitely this definitely adds value. Now, as part of our webinar today, this is what we wanted to cover. And if you want to gain more information about TestingWhiz, basically TestingWhiz is a codeless test automation tool which is very easy for any tester. As you can see from what Balbo showed, that it's very easy to create the scripts in TestingWhiz. A lot of different features that are provided through TestingWhiz, which are we support web-based, cloud-based applications. We obviously are able to do mobile-based application automation as well on both mobile web and mobile native app for both mobile web and mobile native applications. Do a lot of automated database testings as we've showcased as part of this webinar. Completely automated web services testing is possible now through TestingWhiz. If I remember correctly, there are very few tools available in the market which can do complete automated database, automated web service testing. Functional UI testing, which is very common but useful using our internal record and playback tool. We support multiple browsers, including Safari, Firefox, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Opera. So all these browsers, that cross-browser testing can also be carried out. And we provide support for distributed test execution to, for parallel execution and ensuring that we are able to save test execution time and provide the results very quickly. So these are some of the features that we are providing as part of TestingWhiz. A couple of other features we have that are very useful, which is automated scheduler, where you can schedule any job and get the execution done at your required time without human intervention. And image comparison, which is, you can call it as a new feature which very few tools provide, where we're able to compare different UIs. If your products have is the same UI that are being used across different regions and the URLs are changing, you can ensure that one change being made on the first page, is it being reflected onto all the other pages or not? That can be carried out using our image comparison tool. Definitely a useful feature. So if you want to know more about TestingWhiz, you can definitely contact us on the provided email address, as well as you can, if you want to try out TestingWhiz, you can please download the free trial version of our Enterprise Edition, if that is something that you want to do. We also have a community edition which we keep on upgrading frequently. If you want to just try it out at your leisure time, how TestingWhiz is working, how it's going to be useful for your application, we can download the community edition, which definitely would guide you through all the features that TestingWhiz provides. After saying that, we are now open for any questions that you guys may have regarding this webinar or TestingWhiz. If you want to know more about how backend automation can be carried out, please feel free to type in your questions, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. You can type in your question through the chat window. Okay, so one question that has come up is that is it possible to automate all the different kinds of web services where the web services may be providing the response either in XML or JSON format? Yes, definitely. What TestingWhiz does is that it provides out-of-the-box parsing capability for both XML and JSON formats, and you can do you can use a couple of different regular expressions to fetch and parse the information and go to the particular node in the XML format, or in JSON also if you want to parse certain information, and if you want to store it as part of a variable, that is possible through TestingWhiz for any web services. Any other question? Okay, there is one more question, which is where it's saying that is it possible to do all this kind of backend testing while getting the integration done with Jenkins for TestingWhiz? Yes, we are working on extending our support for Jenkins tool integration, and that way what we'll be able to do is that we'll be able to control our test execution from Jenkins, where TestingWhiz would be integrated